Okay, so welcome to our pre-assembly gathering here. The membership committee has gone all out this year, having a mini conference a week from Thursday, and today even a pre-mini conference. So John Dakin is here to give us some help at looking at some important stuff. Oops, sorry, I was just trying to let somebody in and that as well. Important factors that really might apply to your particular experience of an ethical society. John is a longtime member of the Washington Ethical Society and somebody who's deeply interested in organizational development, and is our current AEU membership chair. And I must say, I'm personally very pleased that he has successfully formed and maintained a membership committee, and that we're getting some really good work coming along. And just briefly, I want to apologize for the instability of my video image. My system has decided that it doesn't really like to show me, so I keep popping it on and it turns itself right off again. So without further ado, John, I bring it home.
Thank you. Well, if I get stuck, maybe my video will go out too. So I'm delighted you all are here, and some credit to Chris Kamen and to Carolyn Parker, who have been wonderful thought partners for this, and to Chris, who suggested it might be helpful before we got to assembly to have an opportunity tonight to have a book discussion. And my hope tonight is that we'll focus on learning about the content of the book, and try to kind of go into a little bit of what it's trying to get at. And for us, this has the extra challenge of sorting through this material to identify what is pertinent to our tradition. And you'll see, those of you who have read the book will know, we'll kind of have a sense of the journey I've taken from the content of the book, which uses traditional religious language, sometimes uses traditional religious concepts, and at times uses case studies from organizations that really aren't that applicable to us. So the reason I put together a content summary is to give you all the option of something that is more familiar to most of our ears. It's also quite a bit shorter, 15 pages versus roughly 120 plus some appendices. So so if you could show the first slide, Jake. Thank you. So starting right off with the title, I decided to translate the title into Can Our Ethical Society Live? Redeveloping Organizations in Decline. And even the word decline may kind of jump out a little bit right off the bat. And part of the goal of this book is to invite us to ask ourselves hard questions. Are we as vital as we'd like to be? Are we as vital as we were 10 or 20 years ago? And I know, because of my 2 years in the movement, to know that a number of societies are not as vital as they once were, and not as vital as many of us would like them to be. So my hope is tonight to invite you to take a tour of this book with me, and we can decide together, first of all, if this book has something for our tradition. And if so, do we understand what the author is trying to say? And then by the end, my hope is that we will be in a position to say, all right, I think I have a little bit of a grasp of the ideas in the book. And then you have about 10 days, and I hope that you'll be back a week from Thursday at 4:30 when I joined by Carolyn, thank you, Carolyn, will be leading a bit more presentation, and then some wide-ranging, we hope, conversations amongst attendees about to what extent what they think about these ideas as they might apply to your societies. If we have a large enough group, we might be able to do some breakouts, perhaps breakouts according to the size of people's societies. We're going to try to work, play with it a little bit and see how we can make that a very useful experience for folks. So for tonight, once again, this is more about just talking about what the book has to say. So if you'll advance the slide, Jake. So just a little illustration of my change in titles. You can move on to the next slide. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what Alice Miller has to say about what redevelopment is. And this is going to be truncating and compressing the content. And we can always expand it again if people have questions, especially if you've had a chance to look at the content. I put the content guide up only this morning, or actually Jake put it up after he got it from me this morning. So I understand that people haven't had a chance to take a look, but my hope is we'll be able to have a little bit of discussion, and I'll pause after each chapter for us to ask questions and discuss it a little bit. So if you move to the next slide. To understand redevelopment, it's helpful to understand develop it. And so the author starts in chapter 1 by talking about the stages of an ethical society from birth to death. Now, just so you know, she uses the words congregation, church, etc. So when you hear me using our terms, I'm going to be translating on the fly, and maybe it sounds a little strange, but I think you'll get used to it because I think it's going to help us think about it in terms of our own organizations. So any of our ethical societies, once upon a time, they had their own birth, and I imagine some, if not most of us, have some awareness of how our own ethical societies got their start. My own society, for example, put together these wonderful panels that describe the founding of our society, and it shows pictures of the 3 people who got the organization started. So then it goes through a phase of formation, getting the identity of the society established. The author her analysis is that any society that really gets itself going is going to have answered for itself 3 powerful questions. Who are we? What are we here for? And who is our neighbor? That last one threw me a little bit until I remembered some of my own upbringing in Christianity, where one of the key commandments of Jesus was to love thy neighbor as thyself. And I think what she's getting at is she is inviting people into a relational frame using words that are familiar to Christians. In the content outline, I include a footnote where I mentioned that for us, we might, using our own terminology, say that the societies are getting rolling, are going to be asking themselves, to whom are we going to commit to attributing inherent worth and dignity? Are we creating a circle? Are we creating a group which works together to elicit the best in one another, thereby in themselves? Are we going to be a force in our communities out there doing good in the community? So those things have to do with the formation process. Then a society enters a period of stability, which may last for many years, in which there is fruitful and sustainable functioning of the society in 2 key ways. The first one she mentions is in terms of operations, and I'll confess that is typically what I think of as society: operations. Are you paying the bills? Are you filling the hall? Are you doing stuff? It's a very much of a visible, palpable, measurable sort of an aspect of a society's functioning. There's another aspect, however, she mentions that I think is valuable to attend to, and that is a stability in terms of functioning to cultivate the philosophical development of its members. Now, Alice Mann uses the term ministry a lot in the book, and there aren't good synonyms for it, so I struggled a little bit in the outline. But what she's driving at, I think, is what we are aiming for when we have what in my society we call adult education classes. We have opportunities to kind of really dig into what some of the key tenets of the ethical culture philosophy are about, and practice applying it in our everyday life, both in the society and in our lives outside of society experiences. So stability period is where those are both unfolding and they both feed into one another. So at some point, however, there begins to be a crest of the hill. Um, that sometimes what can happen is kind of what I just kind of mentioned. You get too caught up in the nuts and bolts, and you kind of lose a little bit of focus on that philosophical development. Um, or people can get so lost in their connection to one another and so lost in the relationships we built so carefully that we lose our edge in terms of making sure that we are attending to the operations and business side of running the society or renting out the space if we have one. So just about any organization ultimately is at risk of entering a period of stagnation and may, if they look closely enough, begin to see a loss of vitality. So then there's a period of decline. Decline is typically, she says, it's not really shown in this diagram, there's a different one. Decline is often slower than formation, than the birth formation stability process. Because by then there are typically, if it's been around for a while, are enough forces of momentum and forces that will help the ethical society kind of keep the lights on, keep the doors open, even as it's slowly losing altitude. So decline can be a little bit slower. And decline may show up in a couple different ways. Attendance falls away, volunteerism begins to drop away, there aren't as many visitors, membership may begin to shrink, there may be reduced giving, of course, some combination. She notes that there are a couple of reactions that can come to this, that can come as a result of this. I was struck by the fact that she says a common reaction is blame. That people say this is not, something's happening and someone did something wrong and they're looking for someone to blame for what has occurred. What can also occur is a feeling of helplessness, a sense that this is inevitable, there really isn't much we can do about it. We're just going to do the best we can, dig in, work harder, do whatever we have been doing is what we just need to do harder than before. She also notes, though, in a period of decline, there can be an acceleration of a turning inward, and there can sometimes be a collapse of decision-making into a smaller group that has been around. Longevity begins to loom larger in terms of decision-making. And then ultimately, an ethical society can die. And sadly, having looked at some of the statistics, and we're going to have a workshop about that, having looked at some of the statistics over the years, I've seen, we had an ethical society in Cincinnati, we had an ethical society in Boston, et cetera, that ethical societies do die. And this may, again, be drawn out, or it can happen suddenly. So before we get too depressed, I want to move on to the next slide that talks about the redevelopment loop. Oh, not the next slides. Don't do that. I was overlooking. I was getting so depressed myself that I wasn't looking at the dotted lines. So this diagram also gives us an illustration of how the decline can be staved off. And thank you for thank you for the arrows. So there are a couple different types of redevelopment, and you can see them. Alice Mann uses the term redevelopment for all of these, but you'll see that only the latter stage effort is dubbed redevelopment. I think in part it's because redevelopment is the hardest of the three, because you'll see that it happens after decline has already set in. And you'll notice that the dotted line there occurs just a little past the word decline. And that kind of reflects her observations over many years of consultations to religious organizations, that it does tend to be a little ways into decline where people can no longer ignore it and they begin to face those hard truths, if at all, of course. But when they do begin pursuing redevelopment, it does tend to happen when decline is already underway. But first, let me talk a little bit about ongoing renewal, because this may apply to some of us. I think that all of us, regardless of the health of our societies, can at the very least be interested in what she has to say about ongoing renewal. And so that can take a couple of different different forms. It can involve some sort of an activity, some sort of an event um, that gives the opportunity for the ethical society to celebrate itself, have some kind of rebirth, a new jumpstart in energy. It can sometimes happen when you have a new leader. This is something I'm familiar with myself, as my own society is about ready to have a new settled leader begin next month. And the process of thinking deeply about what we're looking for during our interim period, followed by the search process, and then having a couple of platforms delivered by the candidate, was a great opportunity for us to, we had the highest attendance at a platform that we've had since before the pandemic, for the chance to meet and decide upon a new leader. So that's a great example of what ongoing renewal can look like. It can take the form of some sort of major strategic planning process. My own society has an every 5-year strategic plan process. Mary Herman used to just carry it entirely, one of our leaders, carry that on her back until, with my help, we put it into our constitution that every 5 years we would do a new strategic plan. Another way to create revitalization. The barrier she mentions is that it can be hard for people to take the time to self-examine. I remember someone complained about taking a new look at our statement of purpose at Wes when we were having an opportunity to take another look at it. Is they were saying, basically, I think it's fine the way it is. Why should we spend time looking at our statement of purpose? The answer to that is that doing so, it's not just changing the words, it is the activity of coming together to talk about, why are we here? What do we hope to do? Who do we hope to elicit the best from? The other major barrier to renewal is the difficulty facing hard truths. And this is one of the things that can lead to that decline that you see. So she has the most to say about ongoing renewal in this chapter. And she says less about revitalization and redevelopment, in part because there's a whole chapter or 2 chapters dedicated to redevelopment. So the steps about revitalization happens early in an awareness of decline. And it's more of an intense version of the ongoing renewal. Redevelopment is going to be a big deal, requiring a big effort, and the next chapter we'll talk about that. I have another, the next slide I think will show, I listed a couple of barriers to, I call that potholes along the road to redevelopment. So if you could advance the slide, Jake. Oh, are you back up? Okay. I want to take just a moment to do a brief aside. It's something I shared with my my own committee a little while back, and I'll tell the tale pretty briefly. So you can go to the next slide. I had an opportunity to have an audience with Bishop Wesley Carr, who was recently retired as the Dean of Westminster Abbey, the #2 person in the Church of England. And I wanted to ask him about the American Ethical Union, because I was aware of the decline of our overall movement. This was back in 2007 or so, 2008. And so I asked her for some ideas about what we might try to accomplish. And I'll briefly summarize what he had to say. Next slide. What he said was that early in an organization's founding, early in a movement's founding, a raison d'etre, the reason to exist, is very, very prominent. What you're all about is very prominent. Felix Adler was able to put out there, here's what we're all about. He talked about the 3 pains that people face, and an ethical society should be able to provide some sort of answer to those major questions, which I won't not quote correctly, but the idea is when you're getting founded, you have a clear sense of those questions. What are we about? What are we here for? But he talked about his own summary of that birth and stability and then decline, when he talked about over time you lose sight of that initial phase. If you go to the next slide, Jake. And you begin to get caught up in your org chart. You begin to get too focused on those operations that Alice Mann was talking about. And so over time, you begin to lose sight of that guiding light. And I think there are things we can look at in terms of what that guiding light might look like. And if you'd advance the slide. Again. So I for fun, when I was doing the slide deck a year ago, when I presented this to my committee, I went to the AEU website, the mission and vision, to identify what probably are representatives of that guiding light for us. If you'll advance the slide. And these are the ones I found on the website. Next one. And I think I have one more. And if you advance the next one, I'm not sure if I had a fourth. All right. These are the potholes. So that was what he had to say. And I think that's also what Alice Mann has to say. So these are the potholes she identifies along the road to redevelopment. Philosophical failure is just having a hard time facing the facts of what might be happening. Financial failure and political stalemate. She's worked with a lot of organizations, and she has seen them having to overcome resistance to the redevelopment, which can lead further down to that decline. Next slide, please. So if you'll back up once more to the last slide, and could you take us to gallery, to the gallery view, so we can all see each other? And I'd like to open it up for comments or questions about chapter 1. And if you're like me and you're seeing just one, you can click gallery view on your screen, hopefully, and be able to see everybody a little larger.
All right. And John, did you want to call people?
Yes, I will. Thank
Great.
you.
Okay, there's a few hands up already. And
Oh,
if
yeah.
you need help raising your hand electronically, at the bottom of the screen under reactions, you click on the reactions icon and you'll see raise hand. Very handy, so to speak.
Thank you. Go ahead, Drawer.
Thanks, John. I think this is really good, great presentation. And I hope, maybe it's a little bit out of sequence, but you told us about your 5-year plan and how you got the society to do that. How did you get them to do it? Did the whole society buy in? I mean, what was the process of getting the society to buy into it? Was it successful? If you could talk more about that, or maybe you want to leave that for later.
I can give a brief, oh my goodness, beautiful sunset where I'm in. What I would say, I can give a brief answer, and then I'd be happy to talk privately. You have my number. So first of all, that it's in our Constitution. So the big challenge was to get a new Constitution passed. And we made use of a book that talks about how to do that. And so getting 2/3 of your membership to pass a new Constitution is no mean feat. And we included that in the Constitution. So it's in there. I'll also say that the whole society does not do the strategic plan. It primarily falls to our board and our professional staff, our leader and our professional staff, to pursue that project. And I can say that when I was working on this, I try to avoid letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. That if we could at least try to say, these 3 or 4 things are what we want to accomplish, and come up with a couple of action steps. Don't try to split the atom. So I hope that kind of gives you a little bit of a sense, and feel free to give me a ring. Hi, Jan.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing this to us. It was like meeting an old friend. I mean, this society life cycle has been taught by Joan Lewis and others at summer school for a long time, and it was good to see it again, and a reminder of really what is needed to do. I think our society is actually right at this point where we need to go back and create the enthusiasm that the society was founded in. And I remember one of the surprises about the life cycle was the fact that you don't back up one step if you've gone too far. You go back to the beginning. And that's what you have to do in order to really revitalize
Wow.
what you're doing. So again, thank you, and I look forward to next week's discussion.
Sure. Hi, Omwali.
Hi, John. Thank you very much for, so I got two things on my face. I didn't see that. um, thank you for leading this this awareness session. And I think I want to peg that as an awareness because you raised some real critical issues here. And I think I have a different perspective from Jan, even though I appreciate her perspective of reflecting, you know, in the African tradition. We talk about the Sankofa bird, you know, it's looking back in order, you know, to go forward, right? And that kind of ground us in the purpose, because the purpose really doesn't change, you know, that much for the organization. But I think what is critical is, and what we are doing and I would like to speak from my base because that would ground me more in my contribution to the discussion of what Baltimore Ethical Society is trying to do with me as the new president. Now I want to go back to the peg of the new leader. And I want to put that really as a metaphor, not to put it as the new leader in the sense of a savior. You know, you could run the danger, right, of promoting the new leader as a savior. And you know what happens then? You have enough groundation in the Christian faith to know what happens to the savior, right? And that happens in organizations all the time, right? So I know you're not talking about that. So I just want to clarify, you're not talking about the savior, right? But the new leader carries.
Alice Mann kind of might be. So I'm not exactly sure.
Okay, because the savior carries the all of the probabilities that when that person goes off track from what people see as going back to basics, right? And trying to disrupt, that person then would be sacrificed, right?
Yeah.
So that goes through that cycle. But I think if you can look at the leader as metaphorically looking at it as passion, right? Where one can track the passion in the organization for, you know, it is the passion that drives, I think, that drives the organization from my own perspective as an organizational change agent, is to look for where that passion is in the organization and redirect that to the purpose. And I think that will be a dynamic way of bringing, because you're locating the passion in others and you're redirecting it to the purpose in terms of the collaboration that takes place, in terms of the internal stakeholders, which are looking at the new persons coming into the organization. Because going back tends to looking at what we have done before, when what we have done before was not working. Yeah. Right? You know what I'm saying? It isn't working, but we want to get back to it. Really, the getting back is really about formative relationships, trying to get back to it. Then we really need to broaden and shatter some of those relationships because they're defined too narrowly, right? So I just want to put that there and to say that I really appreciate this. If you just stay with chapter 1, because there's a lot in here to tease out in chapter 1.
Well, I appreciate it. And I think actually Alice Mann did not exactly mean the way I talked about it, because I'm a little excited about having our new leader coming. So I maybe got carried away. In my notes, actually, from what Mann had written, was the search for a new professional. This is my translation, but the search for a new professional leader creates an opportunity for self-examination and renewal. So yeah, the way she puts it does not center the new savior. It does talk about we talking to we as we get ready for the next phase.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anyone else have a comment or question? There'll be plenty of other opportunities.
Jeff Smith has his hand up. It's a little hard to see it because of the background.
Oh, thank you. Oh, yes, please go ahead, Jeff.
Please unmute.
Jeff, while you're, oh, there you are. You're off. mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Some perspective on a society that is presently engaged in a revisioning. And I agree that you go back to the beginning, not one step back. And you mentioned strategic plan. We had a strategic plan that was largely put together by a woman 3 presidents ago. And we periodically revisit it, but we really don't digest it and analyze it. I was a compliance officer for a multi-agency complex of social service providers. And our final stage of the strategic plan was take it to the membership, take it out broadly, and then to have the final publication of the strategic plan having been vetted all the way to the bottom, so that it wasn't a top down. It was something where people, and this was a unionized shop, so people had a sense of ownership of what was ultimately produced. In Westchester, we have changed our name. And one of the basic vision points was people thought the idea of society was somewhat dated and somewhat exclusivist, and the community more defined what we were about. So we are now doing business as the Westchester Community for Ethical Culture. We also realized that we did not have a membership that was large enough to support the number of members that our bylaws provided to be on the board. And so we reduced them to 7. And we are now with the board of reduced number. But at the same time, we reorganized our committee structure and have basically only 4 standing committees with subcommittees. And those committees must have on them members who are not board members in order to really do what we have to do. And I think what we've envisioned is that very rarely does a board member have an interest or a capability of addressing the vast array of issues that come before the board, so that you're going to get more bang for your buck if you've got someone working on a narrower mission that they're more passionate about, in a committee, which then digests the issue and sends it to the board for decision.
Jeff, could I ask you a question?
Sure.
Are you partly answering Dror with his question about strategic planning, or referring to the book? I wanted to try to tie it to our conversation.
It comes out of my own concern for strategic planning, because I see it as a necessary tool.
Do you think it can be a revitalization sort of a
Absolutely.
renewal? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And as someone who's been in consulting and in management and not-for-profits, what happens statistically, crises come with a change in leadership or with a loss of membership or money. That's when you're forced to do strategic analysis. It's much better to do a structured, longer term strategic analysis and take measure of where you are, be honest, and not to bring the past into the present if it's going to constrain you.
Okay.
That's just my own personal philosophy, because I've seen it employed successfully in many type of not-for-profits.
Well, I think the Westchester community is lucky to have you. Thanks for your
I'm lucky to be there. They let me talk.
Can I turn to Nick now? You good? Nick, would you like to share?
Yeah, I think at this time I have a couple of perspectives. When I joined in 2003, we were engaged in trying to figure out what was happening in Philadelphia, or not what was happening, but how we wanted to build. We had experienced declining membership. And as I was to find out later, we didn't have that great finances. We had a past, of course, as you may know, as people here may know, that Philadelphia was endowed by an endowment, but also a building and a camp and a number of things by fairly wealthy people. And we've been kind of coasting, and we had our ups and downs. But at any rate, I think since then, we had, since I joined in '03, I participated in a long-range planning session. And I think we didn't look back at what we decided, but at least I think it helped us, it helped me and maybe others get a sense of what was happening in the organization, which I think is what is the high point of revitalization, redevelopment, whatever. I'm not familiar with the stages here yet. So at any rate, it seems like that ought to be what we're looking for is, you know, we go back to the beginning and say, what are we doing? And who are we supposed to be doing it with, and so forth. We recently, after I think we've had a couple of false starts on a long-range planning, because we felt like we were needing to be revitalized. But I believe it was last year, there was a person who was a spouse of a member. And this person had been involved in long-range planning in other settings, other nonprofit settings, and had not been a member of our organization, but she was extremely skilled in bringing us into this process. However, what we did not do in this process was to thoroughly go back to saying what we were up to and what I think you're used to, I picked up the guiding light of our organization was not there. We looked at standard kind of, here are our
I have a comment, Nick.
here are our weaknesses, and here are threats and challenges and so forth.
I have a comment, Nick, when you're at a stopping point.
Yeah, but at any rate, that's basically my sense is we're wallowing around with this right now, where we did not go back, I think, to what Alice Mann would have had us go back to. John, go ahead. I'm sorry. I kind of went off.
So I think my comment was to say, one of the things I'm noticing is how deeply this material touches us when we think about our societies and how much we want them to thrive. I'm also mindful of the time, and I'm hoping that we can make sure to be able tonight to get through the books. We have kind of this shared piece of information for us, and I hope Nick and the gentleman who spoke, Jeff, and others will continue this conversation, because this is exactly the kind of conversation I'm hoping we're going to have on the 21st. So I don't want to, if you have something you wanted to say further about the book, Nick, I don't want to necessarily cut you off. If you have some comment about the book you wanted to add. So I would invite people to think about their comment, and if you want to share about your society, I invite you to hold on to it till a week from Thursday, and I invite particularly comments or questions about the content as I've shared it to make sure we understand Alice Mann's material. Pam, would you like to make a comment or ask a question?
Thank you very much. I have to turn on video so you understand, okay? Okay, hi, can everybody hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so you had put up a slide just before, and I really did not catch it. You said that there were three things, philosophical, political, and what was the middle one?
Financial.
Financial, okay. So my question is more philosophical. How do we forward our philosophy? It's not an easy philosophy to understand. It's not easy for people who have grown up thinking that they have to, to pray to a god or to a supernatural being, and all of a sudden, ethical culture offers them deed before creed. So I think that's one of the challenges that the society is facing. How do you make your congregation or your platform to make them understand what philosophy we're trying to propose?
Thank you, Pam. I think that probably takes us back to the formation questions. Who are we? What are we here for?
Right.
And so I suspect what you're saying, we have 45 minutes left, I imagine, and I don't know we'll get to that, but I think it's a great question, and I think that part of the redevelopment cycle is for your society to ask yourselves, is our philosophy comprehensible to current and future members? And if it isn't, I don't know if you give it the heave ho, but certainly chapter 5 talks about talk to your denomination. So let's talk. So yeah, I mean, I'm delighted to have our presumptive new president in this conversation. Carolyn's red phone is ringing right now, and we have a director on board. So that's a great question, and I guess I don't want to shut it down necessarily. Does anyone want to respond to Pam?
Nobody?
Yeah, well, I think, John, I think that the relevance, like what you said, you got to talk to your members because the relevancy would emerge, right? The relevancy of the philosophy would emerge from the membership, and I think it might also shift geographically too, because we're looking at cultural factors. So it's not only what you want to put out, it is also what is coming in and what is in the immediate environment in which you're operating from. So those are some of the things that you would have to consider. We have to consider that in higher ed. We're moving now from teaching to learning. Before we were teachers, we were going and we would teach the syllabus. But now it has shifted, right? Gladly so, right? It is, what are people learning? How do people learn? And therefore you have to adapt your strategies to apply to that new relevancy, right?
Thanks, Molly. I think Betty had a question a little bit earlier, and then I can call on people who have raised their hands. Betty, did you have something?
Yeah, I really like the abbreviated version you put together. I managed to get most of everything in, but there's one thing that I felt was missing. I was looking through the book, I'm trying to find it. She deals at one point with sort of externalities to your immediate situation of your congregation. And that really hit me hard, because I have the sense that one thing that's interesting is that we commonly deal with the same externality this year. It's called COVID.
Yeah.
And it's sort of the elephant in the, it's very hard to grab hold of where we are as a congregation until we can see what happens post-COVID. I mean, for some of us, the concerns are that we've so committed to Zoom that a lot of people aren't going to want to get in their cars and show up on Sunday morning. So there is that kind of impact. But there's other impacts too. And other people have learned that they like to spend the weekend in bed, different kinds of things. But it's sort of like, it's really hard to think about it until this thing evaporates, it moves out of our living room in a sense. And, I mean, before COVID, each society had a different framework in which they were moving in. But now it seems that we need to consider that this is something that we're all facing in different ways.
Yeah, Betty, I think, Betty, I think chapter 2 talks about context a little bit. And so I think we'll touch on that. I think that's a great introduction to that. Thank you. Carolyn, did you have your hand up?
I did. And I wanted to tell Pam that I very much appreciated her question. I do not have an answer in this short period of time to talk about it, but she asked it just the time I was looking at the room, so to speak, and seeing some people I know and some people I don't, and wondering if this was not a group that really does care about this issue and wants to continue the conversation. Perhaps it would be good to have email addresses in the chat. Either send it to me if you don't want anybody else to know how to get in touch with you, or just put it out there for everybody so we can stay in touch, because I think this conversation has some more time that needs to run and we don't have all that time tonight.
All right. Well, what do you say I talk about chapter 2? And I totally don't mind if we run out of time, because we have more time 10 days from now. I think chapter 1 really does kind of cover the waterfront, and I'm glad we've had some conversation about it. So Jake, I'm just going to say you probably don't have to worry about putting up the slide, but it's okay. Go ahead and show the slide that follows. Chapter 2, why your ethical society is in trouble now. And you know what, Jake, if you could, can you move us back to off of Spotlight so we can see each other? Because I just, for the remaining slides, I just put a slide for each chapter. And so I wanted to just be able to see you all while I talk. So why your ethical society might be in trouble. Maybe yours is not, but for those who might be seeing some challenges, the two sections she mentions are what has happened outside of your ethical society. Now, she was writing, 20 years ago, so she was not talking about COVID, but we can, and so Betty Chia was just referring to that. What she talks a lot about are trends in society. She's talking about evolving communities around where you're located. So is your location of your ethical society made sense for its community when it was first put there, but the community has evolved, but you haven't moved or you haven't evolved yourself? So she invites to kind of have an awareness about what's happening around you. She then talks a whole lot about Christianity, which I totally skipped for my summary. And if you're reading the book, you should skip that too. But I compiled a list of some things that I think we've been thinking about. And this has been talked about in other assemblies. So others have talked about this far better than I, but I'll just mention a couple of them. The shift in the landscape, the philosophical landscape and religious landscape, the rise of the nuns, more use of social media, not just bowling alone, but now people are texting alone and tweeting alone. Various trends in humanist thought, as well as the rise of some of these humanist, congregational humanist movements. Sometimes they rise and then they fall again pretty quickly, but that's unfolding around us. The political landscape that's evolving. I know that our society saw a big jump in membership during before and after the 2016 election. And now we're suddenly seeing challenges, new challenges that I never thought I'd see again against the separation of church and state. Trends in anti-racism and anti-oppression movements. Challenges to traditional hierarchical approaches to organizational life. Omawali mentioned changes in higher ed, and we can think of ourselves as an educational movement. So I just listed a number of those. But this is all about regarding, what is happening outside your ethical society. And then there's a section that talks about what is happening inside your ethical society. And so there may be things that are changing. Has your society lost its ability to really be in tune with its context? Have you lost that bright light up there, which said, one of my favorite quotes of Felix Adler was, "We need to put people in crowds." He was all about getting out there. And so has your ethical society lost its passion for being out in the crowd, to being out in the things that are unfolding where you're located. There's a quote here that I loved and that I included actually. Vital organizations tend to be clear and doggedly committed to their fundamental reason for being, but flexible about how to get there. So a particular focus on ends and a little less of a focus on means, so that means can be adaptable. And part of that strategic planning process, and that Wes attempts to pursue regularly, is to remind ourselves, or what are those ends, and to try to avoid getting too attached to the particular methods we're employing in order to get there. And I think, Pam, I see your hand, and I'll make sure I'll get to you. This chapter is almost over. It's actually, I have a little less to say about this one. She also suggests that you think about what business is your ethical society in. And she invites people to ask themselves, to help kind of clarify, what are you about? Are you in the fellowship business, in the social action business, the ethical inspiration business, in the landlord business, or perhaps in the investment management business? Some of us should be so lucky. We don't have an endowment, but some people do, and investing wisely is a big part of their operation. And so finally, about this chapter, she encourages societies to be mindful about the possibility that they have become so attached to their history that they are unable to make some of those radical changes to be in tune with their context, to be willing to rethink about their means of accomplishing their ends. Do you have a group of people who are so attached to the history that it's holding back innovation and discouraging new and perhaps younger voices? Or are there losses? If something's been lost and you haven't been able to mourn that loss, and people still kind of cling to that memory, and which it can also hinder the ability to be creative and forward looking. And are there particular individuals that have authority in the system who can help the society to do the mourning it needs to do, to let go of things that it needs to let go of in order to turn forward? So I want to pause there from chapter 2 and invite any comments or questions. Pam, is your comment or question about chapter 2?
I just want to answer that question because it's really important. I want to bring up, Bergen County Society is very strong. We have 100 members.
Pam, would you mind turning off your video so we can hear you more clearly?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Considerably better, thank you.
I forgot to turn it off. Okay, so anyway, what I started to see was in our birth society, have a strong kind of congregation. But I see areas that need to be improved because the same people are officers in the organization. They've been there for years, and there's no new people coming into the offices. In other words, the same people are volunteering. The same people are doing things. We have the social action committee, the political committees, everything, but it's the same people year after year. And what I see that we need at the Bergen Society is new people volunteering to be officers and part of the whole board or the program.
Okay. Pam, I'll mention that later chapters talk a little bit about how to do some of those things.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I'm glad you're bringing it up, and I'm going to make sure to attend to that section of my outline. Thank you. Joni, you have your hand up.
Yes, I am constantly reminded of our founder, Felix Adler, and what his priorities were. And I'm a back to basics person because, yes, these horrible things are going on in the world. We have the Ukraine war. We've got horrible conditions and people feel strongly, and it comes right into your living room on TV. Felix Adler didn't have that. His focus was on New York City and its problems very much. And I live in New York City, and I am seeing that, I mean, you can't ignore it. I go out of my house every day. I see a homeless individual every day, whether it's in Brooklyn or Manhattan. And the most remarkable thing would be a good photo. I'm sure people have taken photos of it. You see a closed supermarket with a homeless individual sleeping in the doorway. I mean, that is so typical of what is going on in our country. We can't afford to have the supermarket, so homeless people will sleep outside it. I mean, it's really pathetic. And I think that I like it when I see people in the Manhattan Society rising up and supplying and bringing food to people in apartment buildings on the west side that are concerned about their next meal and things like that. There really is an awful lot that can be done. And I think Felix Adler had his head in the right place. And of course, he had a lot of colleagues where they would sit around the table. He would say, okay, I need several $100,000 to build it. Whatever, a settlement house, and he would get it.
So Joni,
Yeah.
are you inspired to say this by some of this, kind of dogged connection to your reason for being?
Yes, I do, because I don't think we always get the message through. And the ethical connection idea. Now, we had someone who was new, a very friendly guy, and I made sure every time I saw him on Sunday, I would have a conversation with him. We developed an ethical connection, and he became a member. And I think for new people coming,
That's great.
It's important. The personal, we're talking about, the Albin plan, and we certainly use them at the Brooklyn Society. So I'm kind of aware of.
Yeah, you're from Brooklyn? You're the Brooklyn Society?
Well, I'm a child of parents who joined the Brooklyn Society when I was young. And so I guess I'm second generation, and I belong to both the Brooklyn Society where I grew up and the Manhattan Society where I can participate in.
Would it be okay if I call them the next person?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you for your contribution.
Okay.
Carolyn?
I just wanted to highlight something. You may be covering it in chapter 3, but you did such a wonderful job of translating this book out of its original context that I'm seeing new things that I did not see when I did read the book. I also had lots of flashbacks and was triggered by a lot of it. But anyway, that's another story. But you have on this section that ethical societies most likely to grow are those that. And the first thing in there is see themselves dedicated to serving people beyond their current membership. It's really a fascinating translation that you've made there, because I didn't read that quite that way before. She's talking about mission. She's talking about connection to context. And I got kind of lost in the old language trying to make it fit. But what I did do as I struggled with it, because I spent a lot of time thinking about what she might be saying, is to the degree to which this whole idea is congruent with what I may be talking about myself in another workshop later, is the need to engage in the local community. And while we think of ourselves in geographical terms, I don't know that we always place ourselves within a sort of neighborhood kind of context, which was sort of what she was talking about with local churches. But I think we might want to start thinking or looking to the degree to which we do connect to our local context, our local community, and what benefit we can exchange with that community, getting to know them, helping them, whatever. I think this is a point for growth, but I haven't fully explored it, and I'm still learning the language. But I think that that's a key point right there. We ought to dwell on at some point.
Thank you very much. And I haven't read every word from my outline, and so you shared one that I hadn't read, and so that's just kind of a tickler or a little invitation for people to please do please do download the document. I hope you'll take a look. I'd like to move to chapter 3, if y'all don't mind. And so chapter 3 is more about something we were just talking about: reconnecting the ethical society with its context. And what she talks about is, what does it take to spark a new round of formation? And the thing about the formation is it's rapid. What does it take to spark a new round of formation? And I thought it was something really kind of cool. She said, don't think of an ethical society as a machine that can wear out. Don't think of it as somehow a bunch of gears that are going to grind to a halt. Don't think quite so mechanistically about it. Instead, remind yourself that it's a living thing. And this is where the woo-woo OD side of me gets in a little bit, because I'm a therapist in my day job, and I do group psychotherapy, and I have facilitated groups for many years, and I live in a consensus-based co-housing community. And one of the things that I see as really amazing is, in any one of these settings, the way that a group of people can flow, kind of like the murmuration of a flock of birds. Suddenly you all kind of pinging off of one another. And the author talks about the way that an ethical society can begin to really evolve in a very organic sort of a way. And she uses a term that I really kind of enjoyed about trying to see if you can help the organization to start dancing with its external realities. Dance with your external realities. Not an us versus them, but rather to see yourself as integral with your community. And the dance, I like the dance analogy, because when you're dancing, sometimes you lead, but sometimes you follow. Sometimes you're square dancing and you get pulled around in a circle when you thought you're supposed to join arms or something. It's very interactive. And if what this book really left me with is a feeling of being willing to create a trusting connection with other people that allows you to take risks with one another. Because unless you can take risks, unless you can tap into the creativity of every one of your members, then it may be hard to get out of that downward slide and do one of those dotted lines. So it's really, I think, a challenge. It's like a charge to our communities to I mean, I like, you probably notice how carefully outlined this thing is. I love a good spreadsheet. I love a good outline, but there are times to get out of that stuff and to really come alive together. So that section is called Tapping Hidden Energy. She talks about regaining flexibility, and I think my riff kind of covered that a little bit. She notes something actually about regaining flexibility that I think is kind of poignant. That, remember I mentioned earlier about successful organizations are really focused on their ends, but they're flexible about their means. That is particularly potent and powerful near the outset when your ends are so very, very clear. But then they can get lost a little bit, and that flexibility can be sclerosed a bit. Towards the end of the lifespan, poignantly, sometimes suddenly the flexibility begins to return, driven by desperation, driven by that somehow the polite people can no longer stay silent, and they say, wait a second here. And they can cause there to be a shaking out of that stasis. Sadly, sometimes that little increase of flexibility is kind of a, what do you call it? The extinction something or other, where you can't, it's not quite enough to save you from falling into the death spiral. But sometimes it is. If there are enough resources left in the system, that little, like, okay, folks, it's now or never, you can regain enough flexibility to begin to shake things up again and start to take risks. Then she talks about renewed identity and purpose. And it kind of been covered a little bit already, but it does talk about strategic planning. We've referred to that a little bit. I love the way the group is kind of telling the tale in this conversation, developing a mission statement. She refers back to those questions again. Why are we here? And includes something, interviewing key people in the local community. Get to know your context, especially if there's been some evolution there, so that you can better reflect their needs. You want to bring people into your doors. You have to be wanting that. Some societies, alas, I visited an ethical society once, and there were 20 people talking to each other prior to the start of everything, and I arrived pretty early. Not 20, but probably a dozen. And I stood there for a full 10 minutes, and no one said a word to me. Not a word. So I think, and my conclusion was, they really don't want more people right now. So I think part of it is to ask yourselves, do we want to grow? Are we so comfortable with who we have that we're going to stay where things are at? That is a recipe for decline, because people move away, people die. So that's the section on renewed identity and purpose. And then she goes through a couple of different ways of doing that. And I don't know that I want to discuss too much about the nuts and bolts. It's in the outline, and it's relatively straightforward. She encourages the group. I try to avoid some of the catchphrases. Discern together is one of them. Discern together the ethical society's core narrative. What is that core narrative? And I think I appreciated what Omawale had commented was, you don't have to start over, but you can kind of look back as part of then moving forward. So is your narrative still unfolding? And then work to create a renewed organizational identity and purpose. And she suggests some questions that you might answer. What is our enduring organizational task? What fresh form could it take today? What do we wish to be known for in the community? What organizational size do we aspire to? What's the quality of life we seek within our organization? And finally, what guiding story or image crystallizes our organizational mandate? That is chapter 3. So I will pause again, and I see Jeff has his hand up.
Yeah, in doing that search for identity, I just want to reference something I did in preparing for discussion on war in the Ukraine. We've reorganized books in the study, but we kept a whole archive of the standard. And you can understand the past by reading the Radish history and so forth. But I was profoundly moved by looking at the several volumes of the war years, First World War and Second World War, to see what was going on. And it was very clear that in opposing each of the wars, there was a risk. So I think that idea of risk-taking and not just gliding on some glorious heritage, but say, how did they handle it? You know, do we have the elements to handle it the way they did? You know, and then there's the new, something they didn't have. Carolyn and I have talked about the International Declaration of Human Rights as an alternate legal network in which to discuss organic rights versus politically granted rights. So I think that search for identity is important, but there is a risk taking, and if we want to be out there in the leadership, and I think we have all the failing churches, as people of conscience, to view as initial allies in doing it, because we're entering a new repressive age, and we've got to come up with a strategy. And we don't want a creed-based one. We want one based on humanism. And I found that I was going back to the old ethical manifold to describe world culture, world populations as a model that You start with your family, you go to your workplace, you go to the town hall, but then you go into international law and you say ethical manifold. Here we are. So I'm excited by this period, but we got to break loose.
Go, Jeff. Thank you. Pam?
Thank you. Okay, you brought out a great point about when you were standing there for 10 minutes and nobody even saw you standing there. One of the wonderful things that we do at Bergen is we have a coffee hour or, food time, and everybody talks to each other. And the members on the membership board walk around the room and they greet new members. So every new member that comes in, even on Zoom, is now recognized.
Yay.
Yay, yeah. But I do remember a time when we had a possible member in the room who was very put off by our leader because he felt that the leader was cold and uncaring. And that we have to be aware of too. Are our leaders warm and friendly and fuzzy, or are they cold and not willing to be with, to talk to new members or potential members? And that's what I have to say about that.
Thanks, Pam. Dror?
This is really, really interesting, but I'm very, very practical. We're talking about all the things that we should do, but how do we do them? They're not platform material. They're not board meetings. They're not discussion groups. So, and Pam pointed out that very often it's all the same people who are doing most of the work in committees and things. It's like there's a core group that does the work. So, but how do we get to all this discussion and figuring out what our light is and having all this, I'd love it if we'd have you come over because you're professionals. You said like a group therapist sort of person, and we need like sometimes to gather at some other. I'm not sure who would show up at these meetings, but what's the practical way of getting our 30 or 40 core people that actually participate regularly to come and have these discussions and figure this out and start to love each other again. Right now, what's this? Read the book? We should all get together.
Chapter 4 and 5. I'm
Is it
about
how
to
to
get.
do? Oh, okay. Because I could tell you one of our problems is in theory, our light is on our website. We know what the light is. We don't live it. And you kind of touched on it with, we love unique people and people come over and we have to, some of us are very outgoing and friendly and they'll come over and talk to you. But if we don't have that guy there that day, anyway, I'll leave it to you. You'll give me chapter 4 and 5.
I will say, remember I mentioned earlier that you have to name the problem before you can work on it. And I think that I did not appreciate the method of delivery. But James Croft really was waving the banner of saying, "Hey, folks, we have a problem." My effort in bringing this whole thing up, I got this book in part because I was frustrated that James did not offer solutions, and so I feel very passionate that there are solutions to this, and so I really appreciate what you're saying, and I hope you'll look at the outline, maybe consider looking at the book.
I was looking at the outline because it's great, Bart, that you gave us the link and reminded us to download it because I did, and it's excellent. And thank you. And Carolyn was sort of like referring to it, and it's really, really good. And thank you for doing it. But really, how do I get the people in my group to come together? And when are we going to do it? Everybody's platform is it.
So it occurs to me we should probably have a mini conference about this.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Maybe, a couple different sessions that are related to this material sometime soon.
There you go, out of the mouth of our ED. So yeah, exactly. And I'm here as a representative of the membership committee. Part of our role is society growth and development. So we're not professionals; we're volunteers. So including me. I mean, my day job is therapist. I play around with OD for fun. Wally, that's his business. For me, I play around with a little bit, but you know, there are professionals. And towards the end, there is a section about engaging with your denomination, in our case, the AEU. So thank you, Bart, for chiming in. Nick, you wanted to make a comment?
Just that I think we need to acknowledge that we're a social group. We're a social, people get together because they like one another. They want to talk about things that are common interests. When somebody else comes into the group or stands beside, they're probably, you know, we're busy doing other things. So I think we have to overcome that. We have to say that, you know, we like one another, but if we're in this for a bigger purpose, then we need to realize what we're doing and modify it.
I appreciate that.
It's a social psychological, you know, group process.
I want to be mindful of people's time. So I'm going to go through chapters 4 and 5 fairly briefly because 4 and 5 are massive and detailed, and we could talk a lot about every bullet point. So I'm going to kind of read some of them just to kind of bring it to people's attention. And any one of these. So basically it is offering a roadmap, and each individual society, if they are going to pursue this, is likely to find a different way through the map. So I'll just briefly verbally kind of describe what. So chapter 4 is basically saying assessing your options. So as you get farther and farther, it gets more specific to your society. So she's laid out the big picture that applies to just about anybody who's wanting to re-enliven their society. When it comes to looking at options, it talks about what can you do? What is the menu of options for what you can do? And I'm just going to kind of read the outline. So when it comes, and now we're talking about redevelopment. She uses the term redevelopment. So we're talking about, all right, you can see decline is either on the horizon or it's already upon you. What do you do to turn it around? So she throws out there, relocate to a new site. Is your society no longer connecting with this community, but there's another community where you could sell property and purchase property, or end a lease and lease something new? I mean, so basically consider moving. Merge with one or more surrounding ethical societies. Perhaps not practical because for the most part we're spread apart, but that's an option she mentions. The next one is my favorite, dramatic transformation. I like this one so much that we named the workshop on the 21st. Transformation. Dramatic transformation, of which there are several different flavors. Transformation in platform style. Think about a new way of delivering platforms, or your whole Sunday experience, or whatever day your experience for your members is. Size change. I mean, you can't exactly snap your fingers and presto, you have a size change, but one of the barriers to growth can be that your dynamic of your society is not well suited to get larger. And she goes into some detail about how certain patterns of society organization are just not suited for anything larger than 50 people attending on a Sunday. And if you want to be larger than that, you're going to have to shift gears a little bit in how you operate. This is kind of applicable to many of our societies that are somewhere in between 20 and 50 in terms of attendance on a Sunday. And basically what it gets at is that above 50 people attending, they're not going to be able to organize as a single cell. If you get larger than that, you've got to have something more than just that fellowship that you kind of referred to there, Nick. You know, are we in the fellowship business, it said. What they said is if you want to get larger than that, you're going to need to start to organize yourselves around ideas and perhaps the person of professional leadership. And I'm delighted to be part of bringing consulting leaders to several of the different communities, including some that are represented here. So you have to begin to organize yourself around something beyond just your social group if you want to get larger than 50 people. And that's a big transformation. It's a major change in the culture of your ethical culture society. Dramatic racial and cultural transformation. And by this, because she's mostly writing to white people, what she's saying is if you have evolving communities that are becoming more diverse, but your ethical society is not, you need to think about how you can try to diversify your ethical society. And she acknowledges how hard that is, but does give some case studies. For me, not terribly compelling case studies, but there are some great other books out there. I recommend Mistakes and Miracles. It's a UU publication. I attended a workshop a couple years ago, and there's a book. It's okay. It's not great, but I think it's a little better than what Alice Mann offers. But it is a challenge for you to try to evolve to match your community, but she offers it as an option. Transformation in model of operations and leadership. And by this, what she's getting at is to think about the way that you run things. Have you begun concentrating authority in your organization too tightly so that people feel that they don't have an opportunity to have agency in how the society is happening? Are there ways you can bring people into having more opportunities to have more skin in the game, have more ownership of your society? She even mentions one approach in which you really pretty radically flatten the operations. So sure, you still have some accountability and some degree of hierarchy, but you don't close any doors to anybody. You want to deliver the platform, go for it. You want to become a Sikh instructor, you're going to have to get some training, but go for it. You really make a lot of opportunities available to everyone. And then the last thing she mentions is parallel development, in which she describes that there can be more than one thing at a time. So if you're going to relocate, you don't have to do it in one fell swoop. You might be able to start establishing yourself in a new location before you've entirely wound down your operations in one location. If you want to change the style of your platform, you can begin to have a second platform with a very different style. So you won't make anyone unhappy about giving up the old style, because you still have that. But there are ways that are actually feasible to have more than one, and you can have people have an option between different approaches to the Sunday experience. She talks about then how you can make transformation like that happen. And in this case, sometimes, maybe not every professional leader, having heard Pam's comment, maybe not every professional leader can do this, but you can turn to professional leadership, capital L leadership. That if you have a leader who is forward thinking and is ready to help really make this happen, they can have a big ability to get things moving and kind of break up some of that sclerotic nature and begin to create the flexibility you need. They suggest moving back and forth between broad participation and more focused strategic thinking. So we had a real life example in this meeting that Carolyn was saying, hey, look at all these wonderful, thoughtful people, and I'd love to talk with all of you. That's kind of the example of a wide inclusion. However, also the AEU has a board, and so that is going to be a more focused internal group. So by moving back and forth between including lots of people, but then also having a subgroup that can be a little more efficient in decision making, you have the best of both worlds, being decisive and being inclusive. And then finally, she mentions distinguishing policy decisions from implementation work, because sometimes the people and processes that are good for developing the decision or establishing the policies are different from what it takes to actually do the implementation. I tend to be a little better on the policy and the big picture stuff. I think other people, if you know what I'm getting at. So sometimes once you finish kind of figuring out where you want to go, it's worth changing horses. It's worth bringing in a new cadre of people who can take the hand off and move from there. Another way of being inclusive. Finally, she mentions a couple of options if you're falling short. You might think about shifting into part-time staffing. If you have to reduce your staffing, you can turn to part-time. You could work with other ethical societies and share a leader, for example, or share paid staff of other kinds, or sad face, hospice. Recognize that you're not going to pull it out, and the very least you can do is give your ethical society a decent burial. Give your a good send off. Look at your remaining funding and maybe donate it to a good cause. Figure out if you can migrate to another organization, but don't just wink out. I thought one of the saddest things that James Croft mentioned in his platform on May 8th was how tragic it was for him when the Boston Ethical Society went from like 50 members and then suddenly just ended. So I don't want to bum people out, but that's one of the options that she mentions in the book. Then she goes into great detail, which I'm not going to talk about. So that was a lot. I probably talked a little bit too fast. And I wanted to see for comments or questions. Jeff.
I like the concept she develops on parallel efforts because we have a membership task force now that's trying new forms as well as enlivening old forms. And it creates a certain tension and a certain uneasiness, but at the same time, you learn a lot about yourselves and you learn that you can be open to new things. And one of which we've heard from millennials, don't have authoritative speakers, have panels. We've been to college, we've listened to lecturers. We want people to talk about their life stories, how they put these ideas into action. And we're seeing a certain economy with panels. We wouldn't have to necessarily pay outside speakers to come in and do a panel. We could represent like 3 options from our membership and then have a discussion. The other thing we've done in the board is that and this she mentions too, you carry the issue over time. And so you sort of announce it at a board meeting, define parameters, give people some stuff to look at, have some maybe written discussion to work out the issues before you come to a resolution and voting. You've already maybe had 2 or 3 meetings of the board to discuss important things. And I've been pushing for a while written resolutions to form the actual things that are being debated. Because a lot of times we would come to decisions and then just look at the minutes and say, what did we decide? I think it's more helpful if you've got something that can be looked at, modified, changed, and bent into shape. And last point, I would suggest that these discussions can take place in platforms and in all aspects of community life. This is not an add-on. This is an essential lifeblood issue. And so it should flow through each of your institutions. And it just takes sort of a willpower to figure out how to do it.
Thank you, Jeff. Pam?
Thank you. I just have one quick question, and this really doesn't apply to any of the chapters, but do you believe that we should give our members everyone who becomes a member, a copy of Adler's book so that they understand what ethical culture is about?
I'd like to see if Bart had an answer to that. I'm not sure I know how to answer it.
Yeah, it would be lovely if we could hand people a book and that would make the big difference. I just popped something in the chat about something I noticed in Alice Mann's piece that really resonated with me. And it really reflects how hard it is to get these things to happen. So going back to Dror's piece as well, you can have all kinds of plans, but how do you make those things be real? And to my mind, I think we have a situation where we have very concentrated responsibilities, but not really concentrated authority. And so you wind up having a lot of people working hard and yet not necessarily feeling that they are doing something according to what they would really want to do. So it makes it complicated. So, yeah.
Bart, thank you very much, and thank you. I invite you to look at Bart put in my favorite quote from the book. I'm right in tune with you here, and I'll read it aloud. That she notes a destructive illusion, two destructive illusions: the fantasy that growth can occur without change, and the fantasy that change can occur without
And
time.
without growth.
So I thought it was very powerful. Thank you, Pam. Carolyn?
Just a quick answer to what Pam was suggesting. Austin gives a copy of Ed Erickson's The Humanist Way to new members. It's a little bit of history and a little bit of more contemporary thinking. I noticed, John, in your outline, however, pivoting right quick, that you left out Appendix A because it was out of date. That was, for me, one of the most fun things to read in the book. It's a 1997 scan of social and cultural trends in the United States. And I really desperately want to find a more updated one. So if anybody lays their hands on it, you've got my email address. This is something I think we should be looking at. One of the points that I found interesting in it was when the part of the scan that looked at churches per se, looking at religion overall in the US, was the level of decline that, how many years ago is 1997? Is that 25 years ago? That the decline was already very marked in congregations. A radical shift going on in a split between youth and adults. The continuing levels of racism, the continuing disadvantage that accrue, that the advantages that come from higher education, which is not available to everyone. So many of the trends that were scanned at that point resonate today. And I think it would be good to see them updated, because certainly technology has made a difference, and we now have a very large Gen Z cohort. But I think the idea of a trend scan is one we should look at and see what we can do to find out what's going on outside of ethical culture, because it may give us some more ideas of how we can revitalize ethical culture itself. That was just a thought that I took from it.
Thanks, Carolyn.
And I'll put the book in chat for Pam.
Excellent.
Thank you.
I'm mindful of the time and our staff who are supporting us tonight. I put into the chat a quote from the outline, which I translated from the book, which when it comes to what do we do next, it gets kind of back to that kind of woo term of discernment. But what she encourages people to do is, once you said, oh, shoot, we're in trouble, don't rush to an answer. She encourages people to stay with the questions, is what she says, because sometimes what can happen is if we get too anxious, we stop listening to each other and we seize on the first, shining object we see. But to stay with it, because someone said to me, and I thought it was a really profound thing, that if we are simply wanting to, I don't know, let's say address homelessness, there are professional organizations to address homelessness, and so put your money there. Don't dedicate your society to dealing with homelessness if that's what your particular goal. What they were saying is that that an ethical society is going to work on something like homelessness, for example, because it is the act of working together to work on a major thing that binds us together and connects us with our ethical philosophy, or for me, ethical faith. So part of this is saying is the process of pondering your future and what you're about as a society. That journey itself is a way of revitalizing your society, is that connection and that dancing she mentioned. And I'll mention one other thing that she suggests is seek a partnership with your denomination. So I am here in part as a representative of your denomination. And I'm a volunteer. I'm still learning how to do this, but we care. And and our professional staff in the office care. And I've had so much fun presenting to you guys tonight. And so I'll just turn it over for a last round of comments and questions, and then we can wrap up for tonight. Sure.
My hands up. Hey, this is wonderful. And I think, Betty, when she said Zoom and COVID, this is terrific, the way that we're meeting together as a national group, and there have been a bunch of these things, the 1619 project. There's a whole bunch of things that's been happening. So I'm just saying, I think this is in some way more of like this. To me, this answers my question of how do we do it. I wish more people from my society were here so we could go back and then talk about it separately. But this is really wonderful. And there are people here that I've seen in other meetings, from Silicon Valley and then I feel like we're not really becoming friends, but we're almost friends. What do we call that? Zoom friends. We got to figure out a word for that. Anyway, thanks a lot, John. What do we call family?
We call it family.
Family. Okay. And I love your cat, Carolyn, by the way. Meow. I got one that looks like that too.
Yeah. I think he wants food.
Always will. What's new?
Well, any closing comments? I see John Dukovic from Silicon Valley listening quietly. Do you have any comment you'd like to make? Or
No. Thank you for running this. I'm looking forward to the next one and to getting into the book further. I bought it, but I haven't read it yet. So, but it is getting late. I'm gonna have to go make dinner now. So,
oh yes.
Have to
Thanks for
sign off.
joining us in dinner hour. Any last comments before we wrap up? Well, thank you to Jake and Bart.
And thank you, John. Really great opportunity for us tonight. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I hope you'll come on the 21st, 4:30. You'll see Carolyn and me again, and we'll dig in deeper. And of course, to all the events, budget tomorrow night, and then candidate forum on Sunday, and then 21st and 22nd, and 23rd. All right, everybody.
Hey, all right. Nice seeing everybody.